The scratching in the walls. The Miller family moved into number 42 Willow Lane in the early fall. It was a classic two-story colonial-style house in suburban New England, complete with white siding, a picket fence, and a manicured green lawn. To David and Sarah, it was the American dream they had spent 10 years saving every penny for. To their 6-year-old daughter, Lily, it was a massive playground perfect for hide and seek. But the suburbs have a defining trait. They are quiet. So quiet that the faintest noise at night can echo like a thunderclap. Week 1, the first noises. It started on a Tuesday night, around 2 a.m. David jolted awake to a strange sound. It wasn't a tree branch brushing against the window, nor was it the old heating system expanding in the cold. Scratch, scritch, scratch, scritch. The sound was coming from inside the drywall right behind the headboard of their bed. It sounded like dry, brittle fingernails slowly scraping against the plaster. "It's probably just mice or squirrels, honey," Sarah muttered sleepily when David nudged her awake. "Old suburban houses always have rodents in the walls. Just call an exterminator tomorrow." David breathed a sigh of relief. Right, it had to be mice. He tried to fall back asleep, even as the scratching continued at a steady, unsettlingly rhythmic pace. Mice usually scurried around, didn't they? Why did this sound stay in one exact spot, as if someone was standing perfectly still, dragging their nails against the wall? Week 2. The child's words. A few days later, the exterminator arrived. After a thorough inspection of the attic and the crawl spaces, he shook his head. "No signs of rodents anywhere, Mr. Miller. No droppings, no chewed wood. This house is completely clean." That night, the scratching returned, but this time it had moved. It was no longer in David and Sarah's bedroom. It was further down the hall, right behind the wall of Lily's room. At the breakfast table the next morning, Lily poked aimlessly at her pancakes, her head hanging low. "Mommy, I don't like the new friend in the wall," she whispered. Sarah froze, exchanging a tense look with David before kneeling down to her daughter's eye level. "Sweetie, that's just the wind, or maybe the house settling." "No, it's not, Mommy," Lily said, lifting her wide, innocent eyes, which were clouded with fear. "He doesn't talk with his mouth. He scratches the wall to answer me. I asked him if he was cold, and he scratched twice for yes. Then I asked him if he wanted to come inside." "Lily, that's enough!" David snapped, his voice sharper than intended, making the little girl flinch into silence. Her father's instinct told him something was deeply wrong, and denial was the only weapon he had left. Week 3. The shift. The atmosphere in the suburban home shifted drastically. The initial peace curdled into a suffocating heaviness. The furnace was running, yet the house constantly felt unnaturally cold. The scratching was no longer confined to the night. While Sarah was washing dishes in the kitchen, she could hear the scritch-scratch, moving along the dining room wall, passing through the living room, and stopping directly behind her, separated by only a thin layer of drywall. She stood frozen, her breath catching in her throat. She took one step to the left. Scratch. The sound inside the wall moved one step to the left. She stepped to the right. Scratch. It moved to the right. It was tracking her. That night, David snapped. Exhausted and furious from sleep deprivation, he hauled a sledgehammer up from the garage. The scratching was echoing in the hallway again. "You want to play? Let's see what you really are," David roared. He swung the sledgehammer, smashing it into the drywall. Crash! A section of the wall crumbled into dust. David switched on his flashlight, beaming it into the dark, hollow space between the studs. There was nothing, just dusty wooden beams and electrical wiring. But just as David lowered the flashlight, a sound erupted directly above his head from the ceiling. Thud, thud, thud. It wasn't a gentle scratch anymore. It was a heavy, frantic pounding, as if something massive and enraged was scrambling on all fours across the ceiling, sprinting straight toward Lily's room. "Lily!" David and Sarah screamed in unison. The night of terror. They burst into their daughter's bedroom. Lily was sitting straight up in bed, sobbing hysterically. All four walls of her room were vibrating with a frenzied, chaotic scratching. It sounded like dozens of hands were desperately trying to tear through the drywall from the inside. "We're leaving! Get out of the house right now!" David yelled, scooping Lily into his arms and pulling Sarah toward the door. They bolted down the stairs in the dark. The house lights began to flicker violently. As they sprinted into the living room toward the front door, David slammed to a halt. Sarah stumbled right into his back. The heavy, solid oak front door, which was dead-bolted shut, was vibrating with a sickening sound. But the noise wasn't coming from inside. Scratch, scritch, scratch, scritch. Something was scratching on the outside of the door. Trembling, David looked through the peephole. Under the dim glow of the suburban streetlights, the front lawn was completely empty. There was no one on the porch. Yet the sound of claws tearing into the wood scraped right against his face. "It's not in the walls," Sarah whispered, tears streaming down her face as a horrific realization set in. "It's not in the walls, David. This house. The walls are just how it gets around. It's everywhere." Instantly, the scratching at the front door stopped. The house plunged back into the dead silence of the suburbs. The silence stretched for 5 seconds, 10 seconds, their hearts hammering against their ribs. Then, directly behind them, casting from David's own shadow beneath the flickering overhead light, a long, drawn-out scritch, scratch, tore through the quiet. Holding onto her father's neck, Lily slowly turned her head, looking down at her dad's shadow on the floor. The shadow, which should have been perfectly still, was moving its arms. The shadow's fingernails were visibly clawing against the hardwood floor. The little girl slowly raised a finger to her lips, her eyes dull and vacant, and whispered to her parents. "He made it inside,"